First, we have Muginix. It is easily one of the weirdest and most unique roguelikes I've played, but underneath all the cat breeding and strange humor, there is actually a really deep tactical RPG here. You build a team of cats, give them different classes and equipment, then bring them into turn-based battles where positioning, abilities, environmental effects, and team combinations matter a lot. What I like is that progression doesn't just come from leveling up one character forever. Your cats have different traits, mutations, and characteristics, and when you start breeding them, future generations can inherit parts of that. So over time, you're basically building this increasingly strange collection of combat cats with completely different strengths and weaknesses. I think that is where the game becomes really interesting because I'm not just looking for better gear. I'm also thinking about which cats I want to keep, which traits are useful, and what kind of team I can build for the next run. The amount of abilities, items, and classes also gives you a lot of room to experiment. Sometimes I can put together a team that feels completely busted, and other times I end up trying to make a questionable group of cats somehow survive one more battle. It is definitely not the kind of roguelike I would recommend if you just want to shut your brain off, because there are a lot of systems going on here. But personally, I really like games where learning the mechanics is part of the progression. The more I understand Muginix, the more fun it gets, and if you enjoy tactical RPGs and weird build experimentation, I think this is one of the most interesting roguelikes you can play in 2026. Number 9, Deep Rock Galactic Survivor immediately stood out to me because it takes the Survivor-like formula and actually gives me more to think about than just running around while everything dies automatically. The biggest difference is mining. You can dig directly through terrain, create shortcuts, open escape routes, and collect resources while a massive swarm is constantly chasing you. And I really like how much that changes the pacing. There are so many moments where I see some gold or another resource nearby and think I can probably grab it before the swarm reaches me. Sometimes I can, sometimes I absolutely cannot, and now I've dug myself into a tiny hole with about 1,000 bugs behind me. The upgrades are also really satisfying. You start with pretty basic weapons, but as the run continues, they become more ridiculous. More projectiles, faster attacks, elemental effects, explosions everywhere. Eventually the screen turns into complete chaos, which is exactly what I want from this kind of game. I also think the terrain gives it a little more depth than most survivor-likes because I actually care about where I'm moving. I can dig a tunnel to funnel enemies, open a path when I'm surrounded, or accidentally remove the one piece of terrain that was keeping me alive. If you're already tired of games that copy Vampire Survivors without adding much of their own, I think Deep Rock Galactic Survivor is one of the better ones because it still feels familiar, but it has enough of its own identity to keep me interested. So Dead Cells has been around for a long time now, but every time I come back to it, I'm reminded just how fucking good the combat still feels. Movement is fast, responsive, and extremely smooth, and I think this is still one of the best action roguelikes if you care about pure mechanical gameplay. Dodging feels good, parrying feels even better once you get the timing down, and the huge variety of weapons means I'm rarely forced into playing the exact same way every run. I can go aggressive with melee weapons, stay safer with ranged attacks, build around traps and turrets, or use status effects until everything on the screen is basically dying before I even reach it. What I really like about Dead Cells is that most of my deaths feel deserved. I can have an amazing build, destroy everything for half an hour, start getting a little too confident, make 2 stupid mistakes, and suddenly the run is over. And usually I know exactly what I did wrong. I got greedy, I missed a dodge, I tried to squeeze in one more attack when I should have backed off. That immediately makes me want to try again because I feel like I can actually improve. The amount of content is also ridiculous at this point. There are so many weapons, routes, areas, and different things to unlock that even after years, the game still has a lot to offer. Dead Cells isn't new anymore, but I honestly don't care. I would rather recommend an older game that still feels amazing than a newer roguelike that looks pretty but gets boring after 5 hours. And in 2026, Dead Cells is still fucking great. Next we have Risk of Rain 2, and is one of my favorite roguelikes when I just want to see a build become completely stupid. At the beginning of a run, I'm usually just running around with a basic survivor shooting enemies and desperately looking for a few decent items. An hour later, I barely understand what my own character is doing anymore because missiles are firing automatically, lightning is bouncing everywhere, enemies are exploding across the map, and half the effects are triggering without me even thinking about them. That escalation is probably my favorite thing about Risk of Rain 2. Almost every item stacks, so even simple effects can become ridiculous if I collect enough of them. And because every survivor plays differently, I can't just treat every item the same way. Something that feels average on one character can completely carry another character, so there's always this layer of learning and experimenting with what works. I also really like the time-based difficulty system because it keeps me from getting too comfortable. The longer I stay in a stage searching for loot, the stronger the game becomes, so I'm constantly making that decision between being greedy and moving on. Sometimes I spend another 5 minutes looking for one more chest and it pays off. Sometimes I activate the teleporter afterward and immediately realize I have completely fucked myself. Co-op is also a lot of fun because the chaos becomes even more ridiculous when several people are running around collecting items and pretending they're not stealing everything from each other. If you want a roguelike where the power curve goes from normal to completely absurd, Risk of Rain 2 is still one of the best. Number 6. Balatro is probably one of the simplest looking games on this list, and somehow it is also one of the easiest for me to lose hours to. The basic idea is just poker hands. I make a hand, score enough chips to beat the blind, buy some upgrades, and keep going. That's basically it. But once jokers, upgraded cards, different decks, and all the other modifiers start interacting, it stops feeling like normal poker very quickly. What I love about Balatro is how easy it is to understand why a build is becoming strong. I might get one joker that gives me more multiplier for pairs, then another effect that benefits the same hand, then something that copies another joker, and suddenly this stupid pair build is producing a completely ridiculous score. That feeling of finding the last piece of a build is incredibly satisfying, but the game also doesn't always give me exactly what I want, and that's important. Sometimes the shop is great and everything comes together perfectly, other times the shop gives me absolute shit and I have to figure out how to survive with whatever I can get. I think that is why Balatro has so much replayability. I can't just force the same build every time and expect it to work. I have to react to what the game gives me. And even if you don't care about poker, I honestly don't think that matters very much. For me, poker is just the framework. The real game is about deck building, probability, making builds, and finding ways to completely abuse the scoring system. It is incredibly easy to learn, and dangerously easy to keep playing. Number 5. The Binding of Isaac is still one of the best roguelikes for me if I'm talking purely about replayability and item combinations. You start a run with basically nothing, shooting tears at enemies, and then 30 minutes later your character can look completely unrecognizable because you have lasers, explosions, familiars, status effects, and some completely cursed combination of items covering the screen. I think Isaac is at its best when I stop understanding exactly why my build is working and just accept that everything I touch is dying. The item pool is enormous, but what makes it interesting is that so many items actually change how your attacks work, instead of just giving you boring stat increases. One item changes the way your projectiles behave, another makes them split, another turns them into something completely different. Then you combine those effects and suddenly you have a build that developers probably expected someone to break eventually. Sometimes it makes you absurdly strong, sometimes it makes your attacks harder to control and completely ruins what you had. I actually enjoy both because the unpredictability is a huge part of the appeal. The game also has a ridiculous amount of hidden content, different characters, bosses, paths, endings, challenges, secrets. There's so much shit here that even after a huge amount of time, I can still run into something I haven't seen before. My biggest problem is that Isaac explains almost nothing properly. If you're new, you're probably going to end up using a wiki or an item guide because there is no fucking way you're remembering what every strange object does, but once you learn the game, it becomes incredibly addictive. Isaac is old, weird, ugly in its own intentional way, and still one of the deepest roguelikes you can play. Next, Noita is one of the most fascinating roguelikes I've ever played because almost everything in the world can interact with something else. Every pixel is simulated. Water flows, oil burns, acid melts through terrain, electricity can travel through liquids, fire spreads, explosions destroy the environment, and I love how unpredictable that can make every run feel. I can solve a problem in a clever way one moment, then 5 minutes later accidentally set myself on fire, jump into some water to put it out, discover that the water is electrified, and die like an absolute idiot. That's just Noita bad. But the main reason I keep coming back to it is wand crafting. You find different wands and spells throughout a run, and then you can rearrange those spells to create your own attacks. At first, I was basically just making slightly better projectiles, then I started understanding triggers, modifiers, multicast spells, recharge time, and spell order, and suddenly the entire system opened up. You can make some completely insane shit in this game. Massive projectile chains, huge explosions, spells that destroy terrain, attacks that barely even look like they should function, and if you build something wrong, there is a very real chance your amazing new wand immediately kills you. I actually like that Noita doesn't hold your hand much because knowledge is basically the real progression system. The more I understand about materials, wand mechanics, and the world itself, the more capable I become. There are also so many secrets hidden outside the obvious path that the game keeps becoming bigger the more I learn about it. It can absolutely be frustrating, sometimes it feels unfair, and sometimes I die because of some random bullshit I barely had time to understand. But when everything works, there really isn't another roguelike that gives me the same feeling of experimentation and discovery. Number 3, we have Returnal. It is still one of my favorite examples of how good a roguelike can feel when the actual combat is given just as much attention as the progression. This is basically a third-person bullet hell shooter where I'm constantly moving, dodging through projectiles, switching weapons and trying to keep my momentum, while everything around me is trying to kill me. And I fucking love how aggressive it feels. There isn't much standing around behind cover or slowly waiting for enemies to expose themselves. The game wants me moving constantly, and once I get comfortable with the movement, the combat feels incredibly smooth. The different weapons also have random traits that can completely change how they behave, so even finding the same gun in another run doesn't necessarily mean I'm getting the exact same thing. Some traits feel average early on and become completely ridiculous once they're upgraded, which gives me another reason to experiment instead of always grabbing whatever weapon has the bigger number. I also really like how dangerous Returnal feels compared to a lot of roguelites. Permanent progression exists, but it isn't constantly handing me massive stat upgrades just because I died 20 times. A lot of the improvement comes from me actually learning enemy patterns, understanding which upgrades work for me, and getting better at movement. That makes successful runs feel much more satisfying because I can actually tell that I'm playing better than I was several hours ago. The atmosphere is another huge reason I'd recommend it. The environments are dark, strange, and genuinely unsettling, and the story slowly reveals itself as you keep going through the cycle. My biggest complaint is that Returnal can be fucking brutal, especially early on. Losing a really good run after spending a long time building everything up can hurt. But if you want a roguelike where mechanical skill matters just as much as creating a strong build, Returnal is easily one of the best you can play on PC in 2026. Number 2, it is none other than Slay the Spire 2. This is exactly the kind of sequel I wanted because I never felt like the original needed some massive reinvention. The core loop was already incredible. I pick a character, enter the spire, slowly build a deck, collect relics, choose my route, and try to create something strong enough to survive everything ahead. What I love is how much every small decision can matter later. I can take a card because it looks useful right now, and then realize 10 fights later that it is just clogging up my deck. I can remove something weak and suddenly my deck becomes much more consistent. I can spend all my gold because I'm desperate, then reach the next shop and immediately regret everything. That constant decision making is the entire appeal for me. It isn't about having fast reactions. It's about understanding what my deck needs and adapting when the game refuses to give me exactly what I want. And that is where Slay the Spire 2 becomes dangerous because every run makes me think I can do something better next time. Maybe I should have taken a different card, maybe I should have gone left instead of right, maybe that relic could have worked if I built around it properly. There is always something to learn. The sequel gives me new characters, cards, enemies, and combinations to figure out while keeping the same structure that made the first game so addictive. And because it is still evolving through 2026, there is also that extra excitement of seeing the game continue to grow. If you like roguelikes where your brain matters more than your reflexes, this is easily one of the best games you can play. You all know it's gonna be Hades 2. Hades 2 is number 1 for me because as a complete package, I think it does almost everything incredibly well. The combat is fast and responsive, but Melinoe feels different enough from Zagreus that I never feel like I'm just playing the first Hades again with a new character. Magic plays a much bigger role, Omega attacks give me more options during combat, and the different weapons can completely change how I approach a run. Then I start adding boons, weapon upgrades, and different combinations on top of that, and every run slowly turns into its own build. Sometimes I end up with something solid, sometimes everything comes together and I become ridiculously strong, and I love that feeling of seeing a build develop as the run goes on. But the biggest reason I rate Hades 2 this highly is still everything surrounding the combat. When I die, I don't feel like the game just threw away the last 30 minutes. I go back, characters have new things to say, relationships continue, new conversations appear, and the story keeps moving. Failure is actually part of the progression, and I think that makes repeating runs much easier to enjoy than in a lot of other roguelikes. The presentation is also on another level. I love the character designs, the voice acting, the animations, the music, and just how polished everything feels. Are there games on this list that do certain things better? Absolutely. I think Noita gives me more freedom to experiment, Isaac has more ridiculous item interactions, Slay the Spire is deeper strategically, but if somebody asked me to recommend one roguelike without knowing anything about their taste, Hades 2 would probably be my first answer. It has great combat, strong progression, an actual story I care about, fantastic presentation, and enough replayability to keep me coming back. For me, it is the best overall roguelike to play in 2026.